Welcome to the new JFK Show number 271. And we're going to go way back to Mae Brussell. And I've just got to tell you a little bit about Mae Brussell. She was the original Google search. Now, what Mae Brussell did, she had people all around the world, Paris, France, London, England, everywhere. And she got them to mail their local newspapers. Okay, from all over, from Chicago, New York, here and there. And she had a basement with filing cabinets, probably 30 of them. And every day she would go in and clip little
articles. A clip freak.
Yeah, and she would file them in the right places, you see? So when John Lennon's hanging out with, this person, well, they also said that in Paris. And she was able to have a massive Google file, but it was actually all by hand. And that's how she was able to track what was happening here. What news is happening in Israel or England. And that's how she did it. And she was probably the #1 researcher of her time for sure, if not up there with the greatest of all time. So we're going to talk about that with Larry Rivera and Jim Fetzer.
Flip your hourglass, Gary.
And we lost 5 minutes, but that's okay.
I know. You'll have to just compensate for it. There's no way you can make. No, that won't do it. That won't do it. Go ahead, Larry. There, it's all yours.
Well, no, what's your opinion of Mae Brussell?
Oh, she's a legend. I mean, I think you hit it on the head, Gary, that she was, and Larry, she never made any assertion she couldn't back up with evidence. She was very thorough and very methodical and a veritable encyclopedia of knowledge about the individuals and events she would address.
Yeah, she was the original conspiracy, but I want to say theorist,
backing it up with
analysts, conspiracy analysts, conspiracy realists.
She was very careful, in her networking with other research and everything. For example, John Judge was a very close contact of hers. And like Gary said, she had connections all over the place. And one of the very interesting things that she really investigated was the Gehlen organization coming out of Nazi Germany after World War II. And she even went as far as saying, Jim and Gary, that modern U.S. as we knew it in the 60s was a direct result of how the Gehlen organization, actually got there.
And it's coming to fruition right now in the Biden administration, Larry. I've never seen anything like this. I would never have expected it, but it could be viewed as the successor to Gehlen.
And she literally warned the Kennedy family that Robert Kennedy was going to be assassinated. She was that on top of it.
Do you guys know anything about a story of a Lee Oswald lookalike showing up at her studio or something? I heard something about that.
No.
I've heard that story somewhere, Larry, buried in the
somewhere
recesses.
In one of those books behind Larry, it's in there someplace.
There's a website that has over 700 of her shows, recorded shows, and what we're gonna listen to tonight is a portion of one that she did in 1977, and it had to do with a lot of musical artists of the day and other actors and actresses who mysteriously, died under mysterious circumstances. And we were talking about that a little earlier, how it was one of the big explanations was that they gagged in, in their own vomit, that they suffocated in their own vomit, which we know that happened to maybe 2 or 3 of them, that we know, and she makes it quite a compelling case. So let me see if I can get this. First of all, she talks about the Dorothy Hunt case, which we all know that's the one where supposedly Dorothy Hunt, got on the plane to Chicago with all this bag of money, And you know, they went ahead and took down the plane. You know, 42 people died, and they were like collateral damage. You know, and she just gives that as an example of how ruthless this deep state is. You know, so let me.
And she is spot on.
Yeah. Okay. Let me. For her time, really. Okay. Let's go over here.
Yeah, you're treading near Laurel Canyon. A lot of these bands I think she's going to talk about are part of that. And a lot of people will understand what I'm saying. All right. That's her in a old school radio station with the
Have you done the sound sharer and all that, Larry, at the bottom left of the screen?
Oh, you can't hear me? You can't hear?
We can't hear her.
Oh, I just say so.
Yeah, you want to pause for a second?
Yeah, hold on. Where is it?
When you go to screen share, just back it off of screen share. There are two little buttons you have to press in the lower left. You can probably back it up by just press stop share, and you know, you'll get the right there in front of you.
Audio settings, right?
Yeah. Well, there are two buttons. You want to activate them both. Click them both.
Same as system.
When you go to screen share, Larry, in the lower left, there should be two buttons there, and those are the two, and they're about sharing the sound and so forth.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay. Okay.
All right, here we go.
Convenience, but both articles that I read on this particular marriage called it a political move and a marriage of convenience. Now, if political moves and conveniences can be made, they can be broken too at the same time. And she obviously had to be a source of contacts through her firms and through her constant traveling and escapades for this CIA money going to King Hussein. He openly courted her while he was still married to his second wife, and had decided that he would take this woman as his third wife, and the second marriage was dissolved. She was born in Egypt. She had lived in Turkey, England, United States, and Italy. She also worked as a typist, which is an interesting job, in the American Express travel section of New York, as well as in the public relations of the airlines. These are interesting occupations for a political move, what is called a political Pasadena. I've done shows on KLRB about their coming to this country, and wrote an article for Midnight Magazine on the links to down at the height of the Watergate scandal, and I believe that you could say that she would be a casualty of this particular moment. The Earth News last week, February the 11th, 1977, had an article on how federal agencies get their jobs, and it had to do with Alexander Butterfield. And this again goes into the Dorothy Hunt plane crash. It said Alexander Butterfield, who worked in the White House and who was famous for taping President Nixon and responsible for telling about the tape system that got Nixon out of office, got his job, according to a Senate study, by a phone call from John Ehrlichman telling him that he should go as head of Federal Aviation Post. Butterfield, according to Earth News, a command pilot with 20 years' experience in the Air Force, said that while he was talking to John Ehrlichman about his new job for the FAA, he had to get out a little copy of a government manual to see what were the functions of the FAA. He had no knowledge of the job, he lacked knowledge of the job, and he went through with the appointment anyway. But what the Earth News didn't say, or what the study of Jim Graham didn't say, he's the author of a Senate study on how federal agents get their jobs. What they didn't say was that the day after Dorothy Hunt's plane crash went down and she was bagwoman for the CIA, Egil Crow, he was the head of the White House plumbers and had hired E. Howard Hunt and G. Gordon Liddy, and Dorothy Hunt was a bagwoman for them. Egil Crow left immediately from his job in the White House as an aide to Richard Nixon to become Undersecretary of the Department of Transportation, and that Alex Butterfield then went on to be head of Federal Aviation, but he went on the request of John Ehrlichman, and he went 1 week after Dorothy Hunt's plane crash, which confirms what I said about the crash of Dorothy Hunt being sabotage, because I know that Egil Crow and Alex Butterfield and Dwight Chapin did not have these jobs planned when the Hunt plane went down. Dwight Chapin was the appointment secretary for Richard Nixon. who was sent to walk to Chicago within 5 weeks after the Hunt plane crash to be in charge of the United Airlines investigation of the crash. So Egil Crow, who hired the White House plumbers, Alex Butterfield, the CIA man in the White House, and Dwight Chapin, the appointment secretary, got jobs at the Department of Transportation, the FAA, and the United Airlines. This is why I believe that this other bag woman, with her past profile of working in American espionage, was indeed shot down at a time that the story was breaking. Now I'm going to go into a long list of deaths in addition to the wife of King Hussein, and I think the one that I want to talk about today, there's so many, is Freddie Prince, the actor. And I mentioned that last week that I would talk about Freddie Prince and then get into some of the other actors and writers and people that are being murdered, people working for the CIA. As introduction to my remarks on Freddie Prince, I want to read 3 pages quickly of an article I did for We Magazine. This is an article which they asked me to do on the murder of the rock musicians, and they accepted it and told me when it arrived there, I'd worked 3 months on it, it was fine. Then they sent me a kill fee, and somebody above Hugh Hefner or somebody above Terry Catchpole canceled the article after they had accepted it. And of course, when you hear how it reads, and then you read about the succession of actors that are now being killed in Hollywood, Godfrey Cambridge and Freddie Prince, and Mr. Finch, you can see what's going on in Hollywood, just like with the rock musician scene. What I had said, and this applies to musicians, is that American and British pop rock music during the 60s created an art form described as one of the most important cultural revolutions in American history. Within a few years, between 1968 and 1976, many of the most famous names associated with this early movement were dead. Mama Cass Elliot of the Mamas and Papas, Jimi Hendrix, Otis Redding, Brian Jones, who helped form the Rolling Stones with Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, Janis Joplin, Duane Allman, Barry Oakley, who helped form the Allman Group, and Duane Allman is the brother of Greg Allman, Tim Buckley, Jim Croce, Richard Farina, Donald Rex Jackson, road manager for the Grateful Dead, Michael Jeffrey, Jimi Hendrix personal manager, Brian Epstein, Beatles manager, Al Jackson.
Yeah.
Man. All right, this is Laurel Canyon, 100%. What was happening?
Two comments. That the story was killed by someone higher, and that Hugh Hefner was higher, makes me wonder about Hugh Hefner's role. I mean, as the founder of Playboy, he could have been a CIA undercover or covert op.
I mean, how could he not really back then?
You know, the media, you know what, who was it that said about the media? Helms?
Yeah.
Richard Helms. Yeah, we owned everyone of any significance in it. Well, that, it was, no, it was William Colby. It was Colby who said we know everyone of significance in the media. She was like the Walter Winchell of her time. You know, Walter Winchell was digging up scandals and all that. I mean, look at her. She's nailing this.
Mm-hmm. All right.
I didn't know that Jim Croce, because Jim Croce died in an airplane crash right there in LA. And,
no, that was in Shreveport, Louisiana.
Oh, was it in
yeah.
Louisiana?
That happened. I mean, that could have been a legitimate crash, you know. However, what she's talking about here is the Laurel Canyon scene. And this is Dave McGowan, who's no longer with us, territory. But what was going on is that there was the Vietnam War, and it was really starting to ramp up in the 60s, like around 64, 65. All right. They knew. In fact, there was already an anti-war movement, but the only problem was they had suits on. They were bankers, accountants, professors in college, and they had money in their pockets and had respect. So the whole plan was to subvert the anti-war movement, and the way they did it, they basically went into a small place called Laurel Canyon. We're talking very small. And every musician you just named was a resident of that area. Okay? So what they did, they manufactured these bands. And the number one band that they really, no different than the Monkees, all right? The they manufactured the birds. All you have to do is go watch them on Ed Sullivan. That drummer had never played the drums before, had no clue. And if you watch him, he's wildly hitting the snare on Ed Sullivan. And if you know what a snare sounds like when you hit it. All right, then the bass player, they hired him because he looked like Brian Jones and had never played bass before. Then they got now Crosby, he's got a story like no other. You
talking about David Crosby?
David Crosby, the lowest position in his family tree is a senator. We're talking about signers of the Constitution, all the way down. We're talking judges, senators, all high level stuff like that. All right, so what happened? They manufactured, first of all, they bought up these clubs like the Whiskey A Go Go, Pandora. They purchased them all. They hired people like Jane Fonda, Peter Fonda, Jack Nicholson to go in these clubs and rub elbows as if there was a scene there. They also hired women to go up in these little cages and dance with boots on to make it look like it was happening. And then on top of all that, they hired dance clubs. One was, I forgot his name, but every time you hear someone say, boy, he really freaked out, what that was this dance club being paid to go into these clubs and make it look like there was a scene. And so they'd throw on this strobe light and everyone would just start doing all this. And it really looked like there was a scene, but it was paid for 100% by the Central Intelligence Agency. In fact, there was a complete theater, movie making, editing, theaters to watch in, the most high level camera work that you could ever have right there in Laurel Canyon. It was completely classified. No one knew what was going on in there. And so they were manufacturing these bands.
Gary, for our audience, where exactly was Laurel Canyon?
Okay, Laurel Canyon is in Los Angeles. And at the time, there was no scene. And then Laurel Canyon is a little odd because it's really cut off. I mean, it doesn't look Los Angeles at all. It's up on mountains. You can, you go up on these hills and it's very, very secluded. In fact, that goes back to Houdini, who had tunnels underneath Laurel Canyon where you could go to different places. It's just a very creepy place, but it's right outside of Los Angeles. And it's really like a canyon, but all the houses are up on this mountaintop. So you really don't have neighbors, you see?
So how do all these artists convene here?
That's the big question right there. And they were paid by the Central Intelligence Agency to make this happen. Now, that doesn't mean that Neil Young and the Mamas and Papas and all them knew what they were doing. They just knew that that was the place to go. And they had new recording studios there. There were magazines. That's where Rolling Stone started, right there in Laurel Canyon. So they had their own magazine. They had their own press. All the, see, the whole thing was promoted by NBC, CBS, NBC, Ed Sullivan. In other words, it looked like there was going to be a counterculture. However, there wasn't any counterculture because the people that were for the war were the ones promoting them. And if you really listen to the music of those was supposedly anti-war bands, they don't sing against the war at all. Find one song other than that, what we fighting for. That's it, So anyway,
Gary, why were they being knocked off?
Now that goes a little deeper. It appears that there was a lot of MK Ultra mind control things being played upon these people. People's like, I'm not sure which one, but one of the Mamas and Papa's wife committed suicide twice. There just seemed to be a lot of odd, strange things going on. In fact, Charles Manson.
I was going to say like Manson. Yeah.
Yeah, Charles Canyon was he's in there with the Beach Boys. See, the Beach Boys.
Right. Brian Wilson.
Yes, it's such a small area for all these I mean, now legendary people to ought to be just, and nobody knew why they were really there.
Was this like where groupies are meeting stars or something like that?
No, I mean, you see, you have to think about it a little bit. Think of Frank Zappa. That twerp probably ain't 5'8" tall. And what in the heck is he doing with a 4-story cabin and a 2,000-foot square living room with 13 bedrooms where the mamas and papas over here, you know, you got the birds over here.
All right.
You got the doors over here.
Let's see what may
Yeah, but one more thing. Where in the hell did the money come from for that? Look, we're talking about a little dude with a mustache and an SG Gibson having a place like that. And his dad was actually a high-level military developing chemical weapons, biological weapons to kill people in Ascougi. Not Ascougi, but anyway, we'll talk about that on another show. But anyway, she's all over Laurel Canyon right now.
Drummer for Wilson Pickett, backup drummer for Otis Redding, Vinnie Taylor of the Sha-Na-Na, Paul Williams, the choreographer of the Temptations, Clarence White from the Byrds, Robbie McIntosh, drummer for the Average White Band, Jim Morrison of the Doors, Pamela Morrison, Jim's wife, Rod McCurran, Pigpen of the Grateful Dead, Phil Oakes, Graham Parsons, who helped found the Byrds and Flying Burritos and sang with Emmylou Harris, Sal Mineo, Meredith Hunter, he's the victim of the killing at Altamont Festival, Steve Parent, leading singer of Children, who wrote one of their top songs for ZZ Top, and Jimmy Reed and many others were possible victims of murder. Their family and friends accepted the musicians' depressions or accidents of having to do with alcohol, drug usage, or both. Was anything added to their beverages or drugs to cause personality changes and eventual suicides? Almost every death was shrouded with unanswered questions and mysteries. Persons around the musicians had strange backgrounds and were often suspect. All of these musicians were at the peak of a creative period at the time they were offered LSD. These were in the late 60s that this was all happening. Their personalities altered drastically. Optimism and gratification over their success were suddenly replaced with doubt and misery. Why would people with so much talent and influence as Phil Oakes, Janis Joplin, Graham Parsons, Jim Morrison, Brian Jones be wallowing in self-doubt or despondency? They were loved, they were doing important work, they were having concerts, compositions, cutting new records. Did Jimi Hendrix, Mama Cass, and Steve Perrin choke on their vomit? I doubt it. When Phil Oakes was traveling in Africa, some gentlemen grabbed up behind him and cut his throat. That affected his vocal cords and his singing. And what I went on to say, and I'll read more of this article later, on KLRB, I said, was Lenny Bruce the first victim of this supposed overdosing and drugging? How about Jack Kerouac? Did Bruce pay his dues for comparing the United States police to Hitler's Gestapo? Or all the fuss about his words only a cover story? The 9 years in which these musicians allegedly overdosed, drank themselves to death, drove over cliffs, hung themselves, choked, crashed their motorcycles, went insane, or freaked out without any reasonable explanation were the same years that the FBI and CIA waged a large-scale domestic war against any kind of dissent.
You know, the same thing that the actuary about the JFK convenient deaths, you know, should be applied here, Jim. I mean,
oh, yeah. You better believe it. Let me just say this.
Will be a huge, sprawling investigation.
Let me just say this real quick. Jim Morrison's dad, there's a picture of Jim Morrison with his father, and Jim Morrison was a high-ranking admiral, and he was on the bridge and radioed Lyndon Johnson that they had been attacked by Vietnam, and he came back and said, we're going to war. That was
Jim about the Gulf of Tonkin?
That's right. That was Jim Morrison's dad on the bridge, radioing LBJ saying we've been attacked, when we both know they had no Navy, nobody shot anybody, nothing.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
You know? So now think about that. Now there's a picture. I can find that.
Couple of bamboo canoes, you know?
Right. So there's Jim Morrison looks like a little 12-year-old kid with a sweater on. And within 1 year, he is a rock god with never sang before, never been in a band, didn't even sing in the shower. And within 1 year, you see, now all these people that are involved, these musicians, all of them had military intelligence
Connections.
backgrounds.
All right. All right.
That was during the anti-war movement, and as soon as all of these major artists were all murdered and drugged and dead, then in came the mafia and another element into Hollywood that took over the music industry that now seems to be taking over the acting and television and the young people in those fields. Freddie Prince was at the height of his career. He was making millions of dollars in contracts. The cover stories of his death were ridiculous, that he was obsessed with death, that he obsessed with the JFK murder, that he made too much money too soon. He actually was a political person in every sense of the word, just like the rock musicians that I just read off. First of all, he was an active Democrat. He didn't just go to the poll and vote, say, for Jimmy Carter. He was at the Kennedy Gala the night before the inauguration. He was invited to the White House, one of the entertainers that had worked for Jimmy Carter. He represented a minority that's never heard of on major TV network, the Chicano, Puerto Rican, Latin type. He was interested in who killed John Kennedy. He played the Abraham Zapruder films of Kennedy's assassination over and over. Now, the interpretation of the news media is that he was consumed with death because he played this.
Well, then that's such a crock right there, such a cover story, I mean, Freddie Prince got involved in finding witnesses, believe it or not, for the HSCA, Jim, when they couldn't find Antonio Veciana in Miami, it was Freddie Prince who went to Miami and started to talk to, the Latin community, and he found Veciana for the HSCA, all right? When George O'Toole, remember we did all that stuff on
assassination tapes. Yeah,
exactly. And O'Toole and Freddie Prince were close, So we're talking about an ex-CIA man, O'Toole, and Freddie Prince, 22-year-old, probably because, from the whole panorama that they want to give you, that he was a drug addict since he was in his early teens, and everything, and that he was just a loose cannon and all that. Don't believe that at all, and this whole thing about him playing Russian roulette, at parties and stuff like that, very pathetic situation, the way that he's been portrayed, Jim and Gary. So let's see,
So you feel he really was a hardcore JFK researcher? And was
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Going down, thanks.
He used to have, before it was known, Zapruder film parties, and bring all of his friends, and let's the first one that said, hey, back and to the left was, for Jim Garrison, and then Freddie Prinze,
Mm-hmm. Wow. And now, thanks to you, we know how much of all this was to do with the Latin community.
Yeah.
I have a copy of the Zapruder films. I know other researchers who have copies. I know researchers that have seen that literally hundreds of times because it shows conclusively that John Kennedy was killed from the front and not from the back. And what Freddie Prinze was probably concerned about was who killed John Kennedy, not the fact that his head was blown off. And he was also concerned just before he died with the death of Lenny Bruce. According to a friend that was with him shortly before he died, he was concerned with Lenny Bruce and Marilyn Monroe and Gary Gilmore and what was happening to these people. Until very recently, he was...
What do you think, Jim? You think he might have had his nose, sniffing around places where he shouldn't have?
Yeah.
Well, makes you wonder who would have had the motive to take him out. Really, if I'm right about Marilyn's death, that Johnny Rosselli carried it out for Sam Giancana because he was worried that Marilyn was going to have a press conference and talk too much.
Which she was going to, yes, of course.
Would the mob have wanted to silence Freddie Prince? There's a lot of alternative theories that would need to be evaluated here to get to the heart of the matter.
Well, not only that, and this is happening, right at the time of the HSCA, in 76, 77, so. What was this?
Could he have been a target of Roscoe White?
Interesting.
Roscoe took out.
I don't know. That'd be real speculative.
No, Roscoe When did Roscoe die? I think it was early 70s.
Now, yeah, he didn't live that long, Roscoe.
Yeah, I think early 70s. But you know, if you go the way of conspiracy here, you know that he did not commit suicide.
Well,
You know,
there's no other way to go, Larry. There's nothing else interesting.
there's
I mean, the official story
detail.
is so nonsensical.
Yeah, the thing is that there's a detail here that supposedly his agent witnessed the suicide. You know, it happened in front of him.
You know, I've
That's
something
highly
that
implausible. I mean, you mean he like picked up a gun and shot himself in the mouth in front of his agent? Would that be the story?
That's the official, exactly.
now you know. Actually, Claire has brought it up that Paul McCartney was interested in performing or writing a score for his book Rusted Judgment with Mark Lane. So, you know, I guess there's always a rabbit hole to go deeper down.
Okay, let's see.
Happily married, but he married a woman, Kathy, that he hardly knew. It was a quick marriage at Las Vegas. The courtship was about as long as Lee Harvey Oswald dating Marina Oswald. It was hardly any time at all. He had a child that he adored, and then she evidently couldn't get along with him or the drugs that he was being fed, and asked him to move out. And the cause for his suicide, one of the causes is supposed to be the fact that she was strict on the visiting hours or said he wasn't supporting her. The cause for killing John Kennedy was supposed to be that Oswald didn't see his wife the weekend before and came home and got a gun. The cover story is always those things, but his interest in these what are political murders like Lenny Bruce and Marilyn Monroe, or who killed John Kennedy, or supporting Jimmy Carter, or being active in the Chicano community and being a hero to these people and having made it, is a very good reason for knocking him out and killing him before he succeeds too far.
That was a pretty good explanation.
He went to a psychiatrist named Dr. William
the
Crowe.
hourglass.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
You're
Yeah,
not
she
a very
just
good
explained it.
hourglass maintenance man, Gary. You
Yeah,
used to.
Not a good
I mean-
keeper,
I mean-
not a good
You've
I'm
lost-
mesmerized.
You've lost
I
your
am
touch.
mesmerized. I am
All right.
mesmerized by Mae Brussell.
Let's go.
I am.
15 minutes.
Kroger, who works with the Los Angeles Police Department. He's skilled at hypnosis. He had hypnotized Freddie Prince the night before he killed himself. He had been deep in hypnosis. He had taken a gun away from Prince, knowing that he wanted to kill himself, and then handed it back to him and let him keep the gun, knowing that he talked about and had been hypnotized. And Dr. Kroger has worked recently with the police departments regarding the Chowchilla kidnapping case. Another Chicano famous,
Who is this
a man was
shrink
killed by the
who
Los
hypnotized
Angeles Police
Freddie
Department,
Prinze?
Ruben Salazar.
Huh?
This sounds like a CIA asset, right? A guy who's hypnotizing people, like Sirhan was hypnotized, we know, by a CIA-tied psychiatrist.
The
Yeah, I
Manchurian
mean, at the same
candidate,
time. Wow.
the Manchurian candidate is gonna shoot himself?
Yeah. Boy, that's one of the areas that I lack the most confidence, is the MK Ultra area of it all.
Okay.
He was killed in an end by Sheriff Peter Pitch's men during a May Day moratorium. He was inside of a bar, and they shot through and killed him and didn't call the ambulance until he was dead. He was a newspaper man, much loved by the community, a Vietnam veteran, and probably the most famous spokesman for these people in public life outside of Freddie Prince, and the same people that had killed the Ruben Salazar were working with this Dr. William Kruger, the psychiatrist who had hypnotized Freddie Prince. The weapon that he had with him was taken from the doctor. He was supposed to be suicidal, but I think of the book The Control of Candy Jones, who worked for the CIA, and she was hypnotized and told to kill herself. And the only thing that saved her was Long John Neville, her husband, and she now has a $1 million lawsuit against the CIA. If Freddie Prinze's wife, Kathy, had tape-recorded conversations in bed or asleep, or studied hypnotism and knew what was going on with his drugging, and was alert as Long John Neville, the tables might be turned and they'd be suing the government. The gun, as I say, was taken away and it was handed back to him, and it was actually then used for the murder. Freddie Prince was under hypnosis Wednesday, January 26, 1977, and he was under hypnosis January the 27th. His murder, I called a murder-suicide, came hours later. He took a lot of Quaaludes, which were downers, in addition to wine, and when he couldn't get them from the doctor, he went to Las Vegas, Nevada, an interesting place to supply 100 Quaaludes, which were one of the things he was taking at the time. He freaked out and killed himself. He knew he was going to die, identical to any kind of instructions or whatever he could have been told what to do. He took care of his will. He called his attorneys. He told everyone he was going to kill himself. He called his wife and told her he loved her, and she said she loved him, and then he shot himself. John J. Miller, writing in the San Francisco Chronicle, February the 13th, said Freddie Prince was involved in mind-disorienting drugs. And these drugs, the story of his life, compares to many stories of these musicians I've studied. He took uppers, downers, and cocaine. He was left with a mental confusion that had little relationship to reality, and it had nothing to do with his life in New York. He took no liquor and no drugs when he was studying drama in New York, studied ballet and music and drums and guitar. But as soon as he got to Hollywood, where the organized crime drug syndicate had affected the music field, they affected the cinema too, and they hand out these drugs. Miller said the mystery of his pointless suicide is not really a mystery at all. He had $5 million worth of contracts on his manager's desk. But the real villain is not his ex-wife. It's a well-known comedian in Hollywood who kept telling Prince over the last year that ups, downs, and cocaine would solve his problems. That fellow comic was both Freddie's confidant and his drug connection. He attended Prince's funeral the night he was back hassling drugs for other friends in the media. Now, there was another article in the Las Vegas Sun that I take. It's written by Ralph Pearl, and it said, "Attention, Police Chief Ed Davis, Los Angeles. In case your department is still investigating the recent suicide of Freddie Prince," which is interesting that a police department would be investigating a suicide, which I still am calling a murder. Ralph Pearl says he allegedly had been a regular user of meth cologne, better known as Quaaludes. A friend of his visiting Freddie in his Beverly Hills home before he put an end to his life with a bullet in his brain saw a bottle of Quaaludes in the medicine cabinet. It had his name on it and the name of the drug and the doctor who practices in Las Vegas. As you probably know already, Quaaludes are potent tranquilizers that have hallucinatory effects on the user, especially if they already have a case history of addiction. If you recall, Freddie raved and ranted and threatened to commit suicide many times during his last days on Earth. Prince got those pills from the Las Vegas doctor while he was working at Caesar's Palace 3 weeks ago with Shirley MacLaine. We would have to conclude that mescaline that really and truly pushed Prince over the edge. He was in Las Vegas doing a show at Caesar's Palace with Shirley MacLaine. 3 weeks later, he was in Washington, D.C. at the White House entertaining the president, and then he came back to Hollywood and went then to Las Vegas, where he picked up 100 Quaaludes, and his doctor had hypnotized him, and he was in the possession of the medicine and the gun, which they easily could have kept from him or kept a nurse or put him in a hospital. A lot of people have been suicidal, and they've been taken, even against their wishes, into a hospital. This is
don't forget that she's reading. This isn't May, actually.
Yeah, this sounds. I'm sorry.
She's reading from an article.
Right. This sounds like a passport outside of the 9/11 Twin Towers.
Well, this is obviously, character assassination.
Well, she's reading from the article that they refused to publish.
Right.
This is the article that she thinks you Hefner or someone, maybe Hefner, that I was too much of a downer on Hollywood and the scene.
No, this is her article?
Yeah, she's reading her own article.
Okay. I was reading it wrong. It sounded like it was too matter of fact.
She's reading her article they refused to publish after accepting it for publication. It was killed at a higher level.
Okay.
It's the same harassment that he got that Lenny Bruce had in Hollywood, going down the same path. As I say, 10 days before his death, he's entertaining Jimmy Carter, the new president. He's in the White House. And just before he went back there to the White House, was in November, he was arrested by the California Highway Patrol. And at that time, he had a prescription. He was under the influence of drugs, and he was supposed to go to court on that in February, but the court case, according to his lawyer, didn't bother him. Pete Hamill in New York City, the New York Post, New York Daily News, says that in New York City, Freddie Prinze worked hard on his career. He worked for the ballet and music companies. He was invited into the Jeffrey Ballet. He stayed clean. He didn't drink. He didn't take drugs. He worked at the High School of Performing Arts. It's when he got to Hollywood and began to play the part of the Chicano, the Puerto Rican, the Mexican, and became very popular on the air that he began to get filled with drugs and become discredited. His agent, Ron de Blasio, his personal manager, said that when he got to Hollywood, the army of agents, managers, producers fed off the creative talent of these people. They destroy the talent, they sell dope to celebrities, they sell them hard drugs, and his agent said, this is in the Daily News, New York Daily News, that these little runt agents are destroying talent. They sell the dope to celebrities. The hard drugs got started through Hollywood music industry in early 1970s. You see, the Freddie Prince story continues where my story, The Rock Musician, leaves off, and I will have to do the whole thing on the air with you and get those printed soon, get them printed up. The rock musician scene was dope, LSD with poisons that caused permanent schizophrenia, suicide, and hallucinations that was experimented by the CIA from about 1954 up to the present time. They have it. But they affected the whole music change of people in Hollywood and the music personalities. If you watched the Grammy Awards this last week, you know that the talent now wasn't the talent of the Monterey Pop. The Monterey Pop people are dead.
That's an interesting observation there, Gary, you know?
And this is in the 90s. I mean,
it's been whittled down so that, you know, the acts that they're winning, that they were winning Grammys, were really not the top acts of their time.
No. And it seems like they were feeding them all kind of hallucinogenic drugs to see what would happen to them. And
but I'm still curious about the motivation. I mean,
right? I know.
Well, it was they were developing MK Ultra techniques during this time. They were trying to get maturing candidates to go out and do things.
I agree. There's something missing here, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's a lot of
why be targeting these people? They're very creative. They have a lot of fans. They're very successful.
Just a minute, Jim.
Is this perhaps the Edgar Hoover thing? You know, an undertow. You know,
let me tell you something.
You know,
a lot of these people weren't talented, and I'm going to break your heart. When it comes to Paul Revere and the Raiders, the Animals, the Birds, you know who was really playing guitar on all that? Glenn Campbell.
Glenn Campbell.
All right. And your favorite drummer, though you don't know it, is named Hal Blaine. He played on everything, all the Bird songs, all the Mamas and the Papas. See, that's all a group called the Wrecking Crew.
That's not breaking my heart, Gary. That's not upsetting me.
Yeah. Well, you know, the Funk Brothers did the same thing, you know, in Motown, you know. All right.
Beatles were broken up and discredited and linked to the Manson family through the title Helter Skelter of their song. The Altamont scene broke up the Rolling Stones with Gimme Shelter, linking the kids and rock to violence through the help of LSD and hallucinations and murders.
There's your answer right there. You know, the fear of the lyrics. I mean, that's what happens today. Even.
Yeah, real quick, Jim. It doesn't bother you that the Birds and all these bands that you were into was actually Glenn Campbell playing guitar and all that? You're okay?
Gary, I like the music. I mean, I'm not second guessing how it was
produced.
produced.
Was playing it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, this is fascinating backstory. It's a backstory. I mean, you know.
All right, Mae.
And the main musicians of the whole era are gone. The Otis Reddings, the Jimi Hendrix, the Janis Joplins, and all you have to do is listen to their music and see the movies on their lives to realize that this kind of talent isn't around. And I don't want to name the 10 worst people that are doing music that are at the top in Hollywood. You know who they are. I'm not going to name them. And they only got there because the top 30 were killed, and then what you're left is the next 20, and that's about what's coming out of the music industry now.
Ouch!
Now, that's pretty interesting.
Arlen Specter, talking about Specter.
And it's interesting that the agent of Freddie Prince makes a comparison and names the dates exactly how the Hollywood music industry in the early 70s, as I say, the Manson violence took place in '69 with the attempts to link it to the Beatles, and the Altamont was in 69, and then in 70 came in the other drugs, not the LSD that they had used on the hippies, but the cocaine and the LSD plus the poisons, but marijuana with cocaine or heroin, cocaine with strychnine in it, and hallucinations caused by other drugs, and now the young talent in Hollywood are affected with it. They could be affected through hypnosis and drugs and collusion of the police department. There's a woman, Suzanne Martin, that met Prince 3 weeks before his death, and he told her he wouldn't live till he was past 30. And a man like this, should be locked up. I know people who've been suicidal, and their family protected them and got nurses or put them in hospitals and got treatment. And he was telling everyone this, and they all knew he had a gun. He told Suzanne Martin that about Marilyn Monroe and Lenny Bruce, and talked about Gary Gilmore himself. 3 weeks before the inauguration, he was doing very well at Caesar's Palace, and in Washington he was doing very well. But she said that he wanted her to go to Vegas to pick up Quaaludes, and that she wouldn't go with him. She said, Suzanne Martin said she refused to go because she knew the Quaaludes would kill him. And this is what Ralph Pearl writes in the Las Vegas Sun, that he went up to Vegas to get his murder, and that the murder is on the name of the bottle and the name of the doctor. And also, I think the doctor in Hollywood should be charged for this. But this woman, once in a while there are some decent people, but she should have yelled a little louder. She said she refused to go with him because the Quaaludes would kill him, and she didn't go with him, and he came back with 100 Quaaludes. And last time she saw him, he was holding a gun, and that he had pointed it at her and was playing games, and she said, put it down, and he said, the safety pin is on. And when they looked at it, the safety pin wasn't on. And she said, I told Dr. Kroger about the gun, and I begged him to take it away from Freddie Prince, and he did. And by Thursday night, Freddie Prince had the gun back again by Dr. Kroger. Dr. Kroger said he'd come in the morning and take the gun away. He came to see Freddie, he left, and Freddie Prince still had his gun. This is Pete Hamill writing in the New York Daily News. Freddie Prince's last days were spent talking about death under hypnosis, filled with Quaaludes. He had all that he wanted, and everyone around him knew it. And there were suicide notes. Now, one suicide note in the apartment was written, the note that he left with 2 different pens. This was in the night news service. And then there was a PS added, which was written after he signed the original note, which indicated he had changed his mind on this, and there's no explanation of this note. There also was an interesting discrepancy in the weapons. There was a bullet hole, 2 bullet holes.
Couple comments about this. Number one,
Yeah.
when I said she was like the Walter Winchell of his time, Walter Winchell also dealt in what was often called gossip. I mean, a whole lot of this would be what in the past was regarded as gossip. So,
Sort of like Ann Landers, sort of like?
no.
What got me
Ann
thinking
Landers
here,
is giving
Jim,
advice
No.
how to
what got-
solve problems. God, no.
What got me
This is-
thinking here is, if this was really going on, then how did people like Bob Dylan survive?
He sold his soul. He sold his soul. He said that he would.
Well,
work
I'd be
with it.
interested. I'd be interested in her ranking of which was the talent that it got wiped out, so that you had the lower level come to the fore, because like they were the second, the B
all right,
string.
At the very top would be oh man, I just had it. Jimi Hendrix would be at the very top. Janis Joplin.
But
the
Hendrix-
Now,
but
all the way down, there's actually like the drummer for Paul Revere and the
But
Raiders.
Hendrix
died.
wasn't an activist in any way. What kind of activism was Jimi Hendrix into?
I know he was part of the hey, free love,
If
See,
anything,
here's what it was all about.
Why should anyone be upset about that?
No,
I mean,
no.
Woodstock,
Listen, I got
played at Woodstock. You're talking about a Woodstock generation.
no. Here's the deal. When they had Woodstock and Jimi Hendrix is playing there, they're passing
Star
out.
Spangled Banner.
Yeah, and they're passing out all kinds of drugs, okay? Hallucinogenics and all that. And what they really needed was a bunch of people wallowing around in mud and hippies and demons.
What
and
was
the
wrong
demon-
with that?
I know.
It's
Because-
a romantic event.
No,
Sex,
no.
drugs, and rock and roll. What the
No.
F?
No, but now from now on, when you said you were against the war, you were a unclean, unshaven, filthy, and it was like a negative connotation. See, because back then people didn't really know what to think about people that didn't cut their hair and shave and bathe and all this kind of stuff. So what it was to take away from the professors and people with suits and money and bank accounts. And that was your anti-war movement. And it got flipped around to love, peace, power, hang out and drop in and tune out. That's what it was all about.
All right, let's give you the ending of this.
In the apartment, according to the police, one was in the hallway, which they said probably from a shot fired earlier when the gun may have discharged. His friend said that he did fire a gun to scare her, and he fell in the bathroom and played dead. And then there was another bullet hole found in the living room that was believed to have been caused by the bullet passing through Prince's head. Now, that's not very good homicide investigative work, I don't believe, because the bullet, if it went through his head and went into the living room, should be available and identified as belonging to the bullet that he used, if it was in fact his gun. Maybe there were fingerprints on the gun that were not his. I don't know what the police department in Los Angeles did even investigate it, because one bullet hole was found in the living room and one was a hole in the hall, and there were these probablys to explain it. It probably was shot from his gun earlier. It may have been discharged while he was loading. The other bullet could have been caused by the bullet that went through his head. Now, it would be interesting to do some ballistic tests just on the chance that somebody else hadn't fired these bullets. Well, his agent, his friend, was there when he pulled the gun out and did shoot himself, but it would be interesting to just match the bullets and do a little more work on this case than I'm sure they're doing. Now, his, as I say, his assassination interest wasn't morbid at all. The cover story in the newspaper is that he had this morbid curiosity with death. I don't think people who watch the Abraham Zapruder film are morbid or want to consume themselves with dying themselves just because they want to know how John Kennedy died. The news media coverage of Freddie Prince's death doesn't go into the doctors, the hypnosis, the quaaludes, the destroying of his career. He also had 2 homes after he got married, and that's an interesting fact because I wonder if the people that got to him or could drug him got him when he was away from his wife. One home was in San Fernando Valley, and one was in Beverly Hills. And if people wanted to ruin his career or set him up and have him kill himself in order to show how all these other people were able to do it, and therefore those weren't murders like the rock musicians, and he was compared to them. Was he under the influence of people when he was away from Kathy, his wife, who was around him when he got this disorienting drug experience that was fed to him so often? As I say, the news media coverage is typical. The headlines are, for example, United Press, Chico dies, no one to blame. A Star newspaper says marriage breakup was the last straw for a sad, funny man. Time magazine says too much, too soon. New York Times, Freddie's neighbors remember him. New York Times comes in with these great biographies. He was a chubby white kid that everybody used to beat up. The New York Daily News, last dark hours of Freddie Prince's soul. I don't think any of these headlines are right unless we end up investigating the drug syndicate, the capturing of young talented musicians, the killing of particularly blacks and Chicanos, and these young successful people who are political forces who might open up the Marilyn Monroe murder, or the John Kennedy murder, or the Lenny Bruce murder. Unless we find out why these people are being killed, none of these headlines explain the story, and there's more in the cover-up of the headlines than behind the scenes. Well, our time is up on Dialogue Conspiracy. This is Mae Brussell and Carmel.
Yeah,
There
man.
you go. So, that he would be despondent about life. I don't. It doesn't sound like.
Well,
I don't know. But we don't know what was in his head or anything like that. You know, he's a millionaire. He's 22 years old. He's a millionaire. You know, and he gets his hands on the Z film.
yeah, I don't think this is explaining his death very well. He may have been manipulated. Why would they have wanted Freddie Prinze dead? Because he was looking at the Z film? Because he wanted to know who killed JFK?
Well, I think that what I mentioned earlier, where he was more involved in the JFK thing than previously
Yeah, no.
thought. Okay,
But who else was it? Lenny?
as an actual investigator, you know. So
Yeah.
So what year was this? We got Nixon as president.
77.
this happened 77. Yeah.
That's
77
that's all right,
January.
Jimmy Carter, isn't it? I mean,
January 77, yeah.
Yeah. I was 1 year out of high school.
Gary, I'm very curious about your theory about Woodstock. I still think of Woodstock as a very romantic, charismatic event. People would give their eye teeth to have been at Woodstock. I didn't see it as
There
some
wasn't,
kind of
there,
smear
No.
on the anti-war movement.
it's-
I don't see the malice, maybe if you have weapons and AR-15s or not at that time, but
No.
weapons that had been, found and people shooting each other. But that, like Jim said, this was a very peaceful, thing where people were actually helping each other, back
Are you talking
when I
about
was in high school.
at Woodstock?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, see, at Woodstock, it was turning the anti-war movement into flower power,
Of course, the late 60s.
free love. And you see, that's not the same thing as people with bank accounts and suits and are really upset about what's going on with Vietnam. And so then you would be kind of associated, almost like the word conspiracy theory. He's a hippie, anti-war. See, so they were able to take the direction and see what they were doing. They were steering popular culture. That's what all of Laurel Canyon was about. Can we steer popular culture in the way that we want it to go? And then they did it. They started manufacturing these bands.
Yeah, but Gary, you got to be a little more specific about this. They who are manipulating popular culture. Who is they? You're meaning
the CIA.
And and one thing about Ed Sullivan, Gary, all of the acts that appeared in Ed Sullivan were lip synced.
Oh yeah.
Well, that's just the way he did his show. That's the way they did the show. I mean,
exactly. So if the snare drum isn't,
no, but they couldn't play. Look, if you can play, I'm talking about on elementary level, you can play the drums to Mr. Tambourine. Boom, pop, boom, boom, pop. That's all you got to freaking know.
Gary, you're a musician.
No.
Gary,
you know what it's there.
Listen to me, Gary. You're talking about the authenticity of the music. The public doesn't care about the authenticity of it, but whether they like it, they just go to enjoy it. They
that's
don't
not
give
the
a
point.
shit if you got somebody who is ghost drumming. I mean, who gives a crap?
But all
a
of the songs.
musician cares a crap. A musician cares a crap. You as a musician care a crap.
But let's not get away from the real fact that all this was going on. It was the idea to steer popular culture and to marginalize the anti-war movement, and they did a great job with it because everyone was these people might as well have been from Mars.
This was all coming from
long hair, what?
This was all coming from the lyrics of these acts, that, in the eyes of the establishment was way, way, way across the line, and
a lot of people did not like the hippies
loving and stuff like that, and they had to do Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Jim Morrison. Jim Morrison was, we all know, he was, he was a little wild. He was a little wild. He would expose himself at concerts and stuff like that, And,
sure. Yeah, and that's not really that good to be associating yourself with, is it? And
so they didn't have to, do things to Jim Morrison. He did whatever he did to himself.
Sure. Yeah. Now.
Well, I'm intrigued by your theory, Gary. I don't know that I'm persuaded, but I'm intrigued by it. I mean, it's worth thinking. It's worth thinking about.
Didn't you interview Dave McGowan one time called "Weird Scenes in the Canyon"? It was about Laurel Canyon, and it was around 2014 or 15.
Yeah, I believe I did. Yeah.
Okay, well, they killed him. They killed him, and that's the main thing about his book, that he says it was to marginalize the anti-war movement. And all of these people,
well,
like
wait
Jim
a minute. When you say he said it was to marginalize the, what is it you're talking about?
The whole Laurel Canyon scene and the hippie movement was to marginalize true anti-war people.
I
And
don't think it worked, Gary. I mean, more people became anti-war because of the hippies. My God, I don't think it was a failure. It was a success.
Yeah.
But they didn't sing about ending the war. They just
Gary,
loved
who
freedom and all
gives
that.
a damn? I'm telling you, the general impact of this era was anti-war, and it had no negative. It had no negative.
And it was all driven by the Central Intelligence Agency, and everything that you liked and everything that
This
you
is
loved.
like the Tavistock,
it was them.
You know.
It was them. It was.
When you
It is.
get-
When you
get, when you get
We'll
into,
do a show about this sometime. In
when you
fact,
get
we'll
into this
have
like
to do
Kent
that.
State,
all over it.
like Kent
We'll have
State,
to-
you
we'll
don't
have
need
to do
that.
that. Gary,
Yeah.
I think we've actually run our course. I mean, yeah, but that's because you were not the proper
That's right. So
custodian
there's our-
of the hourglass.
There's our 5 minutes right there. So it's time to close.
You shocked us in your failure to manipulate the hourglass
Man,
as
you put-
custodian, as the
Man,
custodian.
you put Mae Brussell up there, you might as well be putting a big blonde with big boobs up there. I'm gonna be mesmerized, okay? So that's my excuse.
Do it.
We'll call it a
Okay.
show. This is JFK
Take us out.
271. We'll see y'all next time.